Welcome, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you.
You're in great demand in these conferences, talking about what the Crown Estate is doing. Help people get an umbrella picture, first of all, Lamé. Describe the Crown Estate. What do you own? How much, the scale of it, and what you're doing with it?
Wow, okay, that's a very big question, but I think I can squeeze it in very quickly. So for those who don't know, Lamé Verre, I'm the director for Net Zero at the Crown Estate. And the Crown Estate is one of the UK's largest landowners. We have land across the city, rural, and the seabed. And in the city, we have a big real estate business. So most of it you would know around Regent Street. But we also have regional portfolio around business park, industrial parks. So Cambridge Business Park, for example, is one of ours. We've just bought the Debenhams in Oxford to turn that into an innovation hub. We have 185,000 acres of tenant farmlands across England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. We own the seabed out up to 12 nautical miles, and we also own 50% of the foreshore across England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And with that comes the ports, the marinas, the beaches. And then on the seabed, which is very busy, so if you think the M25 is crowded, then you need to see the UK seabed, where we lease the seabed for offshore wind, mining aggregates, which contributes 40% to the UK construction industry. We also have linear assets, so the pipelines, the cables, the fiber optics, and a whole host of others. So yeah, it's a very busy portfolio. It's eclectic, but actually they are complementary.
It would have been easier and quicker to ask you what you don't own, isn't it?
Yes, it would have been easier, but I think it's always nice to provide that context, because also because of the name, people misrepresent what we do and who we are. We actually work for you. We work for the people, so everything we earn goes back into the Treasury to fund NHS and all of our social services. So we're, taking care of the property for lasting prosperity for the nation.
That's an interesting point. Do you generate so much money that you can fund other public services? I mean, why is more not being put in to develop biodiversity? Or
no, there is. So we are investing a lot. So I think maybe another context to set before we kind of go into specifics. So the way we look at the world through the portfolio we manage is through what we call the value creation framework, which is really about 4 pillars of sustainability, which is the net zero pillar in my bag, which I look after. We've got nature recovery, we've got thriving community, and economic sustainability back to Treasury. So those 4 things have to be true for the work we do to progress. And so we do invest a lot in nature and biodiversity through our nature restoration work. So we've planted a whole lot of woodlands and peatlands and hedgerows, and so we're doing a lot with the terrestrial land that we own. What we've done with the seabed is the whole seabed mapping to make sure that we're using the seabed more efficiently and effectively over the next set of generations. And so we've also zoned off or kind of safeguard areas of the seabed for nature and conservation.
So what does that actually involve? If we take the seabed, which is the last point you raised, you're zoning off areas of the seabed to safeguard it from development and other applications. Are you actually managing it and developing biodiversity projects within the seabed area as part of your transitions? Or
it is part of it, so it's all kind of work in progress. We're on a journey, and so we've done more on land, and we're now kind of moving on onto the seabed and the marine, so looking at blue economy and all those kind of things. So we've got Caroline Price, my colleague. She's the nature and environmental director for our marine business. It's a really critical part of our strategy, yeah.
So let's move on to land then. Can you give us some more concrete, if you'll excuse the phrase, examples of successes and achievements you've either had or that you're working on to progress towards your net zero?
So I think, what we do has to work for climate, nature, people, and the economy. So in our urban land or kind of real estate business, one of the big projects we're working on is the Park to Park, which is about bringing nature into the city. So if you think about our London portfolio, which is mainly around Regent Street, it is a very densely populated area and it's overbuilt. And so how do you bring nature into the city? And we're doing that through the Park to Park project.
Okay.
and working with Westminster City Council and a whole host of other stakeholders, yeah.
Just a reminder, if you can catch my eye with a hand up, we'll take questions as we go along if we can. If you're watching online, do send some questions through. Should you wish, it comes directly to my iPad and I'll try and pick those up as well. What are the areas in your portfolio, and it's a vast portfolio, that are weakest in terms of sustainability? And what are you going to do to remedy that?
So I wouldn't say weakest, right? I think it's with everything in society, it's about materiality and the pressing needs. So from a UK lens perspective, the biggest challenge has been decarbonizing the energy system, and that meant rolling out offshore wind. And so we've grown exponentially in leasing the seabed for that purpose, right? So when I take my mandate as net zero director, which is 1, decarbonize our portfolio, 2, contribute to the UK net zero, 3, contribute to the UK energy secure future. It sounds like a really small mandate, but it is a big job. And so you've got to then prioritize and do things in buckets, right? So the big question I always ask is, how do you eat an elephant? And so you've got to take it in chewable bites. And so we've been working through that in a pragmatic, orderly way and taking them sector by sector. So not all of them are the same level of maturity, but we are cognizant that those 4 things have to be true always. And it doesn't have to be 25% to get to 100, but it has to be 100% all the time, not some of the time.
So you mentioned the sort of 4 pillars being climate,
net zero.
people, net zero.
So climate, people, nature, and economic returns.
Economic, that means the UK Treasury.
Yes, please.
Okay, so who wins the argument? From my limited experience of the UK government, I'm
UK... Nigerian, by the way, just for context, so don't set me up for failure now.
I'm not putting the UK Treasury on your shoulders, but their economic imperatives will always win out, won't they, rather than green arguments.
Well,
for a project.
I think it's not totally true, because I think they get that their job is to provide the guardrails for us to exist as an organization. And so we take those guardrails and then we work within this, the sandbox that we're giving. But the way we look at things is not economic returns versus net zero, right? There is a break-even point between net zero and net profit, and it's our job to find that break-even point. And so our decision-making forum, is a third. Is the CSO, the CFO, and the CEO. And so those 3 lenses are really critical in making, whether it's a net zero decision or a nature decision or a people decision versus economic returns. We will always return economic value back to Treasury, but we have to do that taking into consideration the impact on climate, nature, and people. It's just as simple as that.
Sure.
It's not an either or, it's an and.
Do you have any examples of projects that you have in the pipeline where that wrestling between those different priorities have...
Yeah, we do have one. So our St. James's Market, where our office is, we're number 1, and across the road is number 2. And it's needed to go through a development, and we've had to have many versions of what that development will look like. But the most important decision-making factor was embodied carbon in terms of what we do with that building. And so for us, it's not an add-on. It is embedded in how we look at our project. So for us, that was a case study where we looked at the different pillars. There will be trade-offs, but you want to make the right informed trade-off when you look at all the aspects. So embodied carbon isn't something that many people think about in real estate, but it's a critical point when you're doing development, because you can go net zero on a new build when you have to retrofit heritage buildings in the middle of Regent Street. Your boundaries are really, really constrained. And so you have to get creative, and this is where the innovation and the creative thinking comes into play.
I was going to ask, your real estate, apart from being vast, I'm assuming is pretty old and pretty established.
Don't use the word old, it's heritage.
It's heritage.
It's heritage, come on.
It's heritage, and it has vast amount of inherent problems. Every building must be leaking and using up vast amounts of fossil fuel. How are you tackling that?
So before I even come to our estate, we all know that the UK has probably the poorest housing stock in Europe. And so our buildings are just inefficient inherently. And so then you lay on top that, age and heritage. It's difficult, and the planners are very strict in what you can and cannot do. And so and most buildings and real estate businesses, we've all done the kind of low-hanging fruit, quick wins, LED lighting, energy efficiency, and all of that. So now the question I ask our real estate business is, how many boilers are you taking out next year? How many heat pumps are you putting in? Because we're going to that capital investment piece. So, it's not about the lights anymore, it's not about the windows, it's about actually decarbonizing the building and the fuel used in the building, and that is the next phase of transition that we're in. But it is a journey. It's not, you can't just go and decarbonize all of Regent Street overnight, because it's also an eclectic use, right? For those of you, if you're walking down Piccadilly Circus, and I ran into a good friend the other day from the Tube as I was going to the office, it's multi-use, right? You've got restaurants and hotels and shop fronts and offices and residential buildings at the top. And so you have to figure out how to decarbonize in a systematic way to maintain customer satisfaction, to maintain revenue, and to minimize as much disruption. So it's going to be a step-by-step. There is where technology will help us to look at the leases so that we know, as and when leases are coming to an end, and you can bulk intervene. You have to look at where you can zone off areas where you can manage energy use. If it's an office and they finish at 5, you should really turn everything off. But if it's a hotel or a restaurant, you can't really do that. And so one of the other projects that we're looking at the moment for London portfolio is kind of looking at district energy, for example, to be able to deliver heating and cooling to the whole area, because if you look at that versus individual heat pumps, you have to ensure that the value for money from a technological perspective, carbon reduction, energy efficiency, duration of the infrastructure, because it's a heavy capex load. So it's a journey. I'll say that again, and I'm going to use that word multiple times, because there is no silver bullet. And it's important that we recognize that even as a nation, right, where we're at on our net zero trajectories and pathways, the UK has done a phenomenal job in terms of where it wants to be and where it has gotten to. It is a leader in that space. But the truth is, if the UK gets to net zero and the rest of the world doesn't, then we hit the target and miss the point. And so there's also the wider ecosystem and macroeconomics and geopolitics that we have to take into cognizance.
I think Richard from the Carbon Trust is going to touch on exactly that next.
So I will leave that for you to tackle, friend.
That's a useful segue. We have a question there, and a question that came in slightly earlier online. Do you think there would be a virtuous biodiversity credit market in the UK?
So we've just actually taken a paper to our board or sustainability committee looking at carbon dioxide removal and the carbon credit market. And so my view, and that was my paper, was really we have to think about it, right? It's not something that you kind of park because it's difficult and it has a bad rap now. If you look at all net zero trajectories, there's going to be a residual 10% in 2050. But none of us here will be here in 2050 doing whatever we're doing now. Therefore, do you kick the can down the road, or do you think about it now? Because it's not only about reducing your current and future emissions. Don't forget, we also have past emissions that we've kind of left behind. So my proposal or holding position is we've got land, we've got the seabed. You can do natural carbon sinks with those. We can create carbon dioxide removal projects. So we looked at a few technologies. Direct air capture is probably the top right-hand corner of the 2x2, but it is energy intensive, it's capital intensive. But there are other projects in between that delivers for both climate and nature. So we're looking at biochar and enhanced rock weathering as examples of where we can be a leader and pilot some of these things on our portfolio and estates. And so that will deliver for both carbon and nature. We're also looking at regenerative farming as well in terms of how we use the farmlands and how we can encourage farmers to, use part of the land for nature and the other part for cropping or grazing. So we have to be creative. There is no playbook in this thing that we're trying to do. We're building this plane as we're all flying. And so it is scary, it is worrisome, but let it not be said, it cannot be for lack of trying. I think that's probably my find a holding position on the conversation because we have to try. We did put a man on the moon, and we've done other great feats as humankind. So this cannot be said that we did not try.
There's a microphone in the room somewhere, I hope, because the gentleman has his arm up. Where's the mic? Over in the middle. Sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Ben Horn from Pineapple Partnerships. It's fascinating to know that the Crown Estate kind of has so much ownership over the kind of the waters around the UK, and 12 nautical miles is quite fascinating. But I'm really fascinated to know what you're doing in terms of keeping the water companies accountable for the sewage that they're putting into the water systems. It's all well and good that we're trying to protect like kind of the livelihood of the seas around the UK, but if sewage is coming straight into our waterways from rivers, etc., what are you guys doing to keep people accountable?
So I think from our perspective and from a net zero lens is really about collaboration and working in partnership. We all know that our water sector in the UK is probably on its knees for a variety of reasons. And so whilst it's always easier for backlashes and media to take the cane and beat sectors over the head, I think we all have to work together to get to where we need to get to, because unless we support sectors that are struggling to meet the biodiversity and the ecosystem protection that we need, then it's really kind of a moot point, right? So our view is around collaboration and partnership. So we've got a really strong partnership strategy in terms of place-based, where we have ownership and land and property to ensure that we're working with the sectors that are there. We're working with the communities, we're working with the supply chain, kind of across the entire value chain from, because there are some that we have to deliver ourselves. So our real estate portfolio, for example, we own scope 1, 2, and 3, but in the marine is all scope 3. In rural is all scope 3. So can I go and beat them over the head and force them to get to net zero tomorrow? No, but I have to work with them. And so it's that SDG number 17, I think probably should have been number 1, which is partnership for the goals. We have to work together. It's collaborate, collaborate, collaborate.
I'm glad you touched on that question. It's something I wanted to raise. I also want to touch on a slightly different but perhaps related issue, is that it strikes me that whatever you do, you can't win. We all want renewables. Most of us, I hope all of us, welcome the proliferation of wind farms. Perhaps it's more controversial for some. I live in a part of the UK called Norfolk, and I love, personally, it's just me, I love looking out at the wind farms on my coast. I think every village should have a wind turbine. I think every town should have its own wind farm. That's just me. And I've got friends who really object to that. So you can't win, can you? How do you get over it? It's a question of engagement.
So I think, what's the phrase? Not in my backyard, right? So, well, I think the biggest travesty that we've done for those of us that work in energy is that we communicate like we're talking to only ourselves. We forget Jane and Joe blogs on the streets. So there's been a really big gap in engagement of the civil society in what the net zero transition and energy transition means for them. And so now they feel like it's being done to them rather than with them. And so my kind of philosophy is you've just got to meet people where they're at, have that conversation, show them what is in it for them, and then also give them time. You can't just sell an idea and expect people to come around overnight when they've not had any massive infrastructure project since before the Second World War, So these are massive infrastructure projects, right? Net zero and energy transition is not in the cloud, it's infrastructure. You've got to put steel and concrete in the ground, and it's got to be in someone's backyard at some point. It's not just, in the DRC where we get the critical minerals. It has to be in our backyard if we want to have secure, cheap, and affordable and clean energy in the UK. Because electrons are domestic, molecules are global. Nature is domestic, climate is global. And so we have to think globally, but implement locally, local. kind of. But yeah, but it's an engagement piece that just got lost in the transition conversation.
And I think what you say there translates into private business. We heard so much yesterday about the need to engage every member of staff, not just having your exec team and board as champions for sustainability, without which you'll do nothing, but to engage the entire staff as well, who will probably generate better ideas than you would come up with in your original plan. I mean, that whole message translates across to the private and corporate and state world.
Yeah, and it's, like most things, strategy is kind of done at the top in the ivory tower, and globally cascading that down to the doers has not actually always been. I mean, for some companies, their strategy is a secret, right? It's kind of like, no, it cannot be a secret. If I have a job, I need to know how myself as the janitor is tied to putting the man on the moon, right? I need to be able to see that link. But most companies haven't done a good job in translating their strategy into a communication channel that people relate to. So it's a relatability issue, right? And so it's important that whilst the board gets it and the C-levels get it, we have to ensure that the doers, they get it, but they're also empowered to just do. Because by the time you run things up the chain of command, up and down, you lose 9 months. It's why we're where we are. When I was going to COP28, my son said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to COP28. He said, you mean they've met for 28 times and they've not fixed it? He was 7 out of the mounts of babes, right? Our words of wisdom. So sometimes we think the big idea is outside. And so one of the projects I'm working on now is creating this innovation hub internally to crowdsource these ideas. We've got almost 1,000 employees now. I cannot speak to 1,000 of them. They're only 24 hours and 2 hands. So I need to find a way to get those ideas to surface up, and we have to create those enable those ideas to show up. But we have technology now that can allow us to do that. The whole suggestion boxes. It's literally a digital version of that I'm asking for, but also something that is transparent, that others can see what has been suggested, so that we can join the dots and we can scale these things. Because we're not lacking innovation, we're just lacking scale.
Can we end on one question that's come in online, which I think is brilliant and I hope is helpful to people watching. What can an SME do to integrate biodiversity into strategy, where the biggest negative impacts happen in the value chain, in raw materials that can't easily be influenced?
I think it's about asking the right questions, right? So in my last job, the question was, how far down the value chain do you go? But ignorance is no longer an excuse either, so you've got to ask the question. But I think for SMEs, where they struggle is they get 5, 10 different type of spreadsheets to answer questions on their supply chain. So there is something around the big players consolidating and agreeing on what those templates look like to make it easy for them, because they're all spinning multiple plates. And if they're having to answer different type of questions and they're filling spreadsheets with thousands of line items to respond to, we will break those businesses, and we need the SMEs to be able to create an enduring value chain and supply chain. Because the other piece that we didn't get to now, and I think we're out of time, is about adaptation and resilience. And the resilience is not just a climate resilience. We need the supply chain to be resilient, because that's what's going to create the jobs for the next generation, for the children and the people coming after us. And we owe it to them to make sure that we are stronger in the future.
What a great way to end. Lamé, thank you so much for your time. I know you've got to get back to work at the Crown Estate.
You have to do the day job.
to do the day job. But if anybody wants to have a quick chat with you outside, I don't know if they're able to call you on the way out, or do you need to run straight away?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. The demands of the Crown Estate are such. Lamé, Verre, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you.